Tonight on the Online Wine Tasting Club, we go punting on some gondolas. Winemaker Alex worries all about his shriveled cork. And we try to work out what pairs with rotten whales. You'd best sit back, relax and have a taste of the wine show with the Online Wine Tasting Club, because we're going on a tour of Portugal.
Well, good evening and welcome to this really exciting, brand new episode of the Online Wine Tasting Club, where we are doing a taste of the wine show. So for those who haven't joined us before, I'm Jamie. I do all things wine-ish, kind of sommy kind of stuff. We've got Alex and we've got our very, very special guest host this evening from the wine show, Mr. Joe Fattorini. So good evening, Joe. Lovely of you to join us.
Portugal, a nation with a wine culture as unique as its history of discovery and exploration. So many of us tend to associate it more with its fabulous beaches, golf holidays to the Algarve or Cristiano Ronaldo than we do its wine. But this being a wine tasting, we thought we'd probably focus on that tonight. Now on the Online Wine Tasting Club, we often talk about how you need to get away from the tourist spots to find beautiful countryside harbouring unknown wine treasures. However, going to vineyards, visiting Porto, sipping wine, taking a boat trip down the Douro, just like the stars of the wine show did, are already on the itinerary of many tourists. But, just like the other countries, Portugal rewards you very handsomely when you do get off the beaten track. Tonight, just like they did in Series 3, we will be exploring this exquisite country, all the way from the north, cooled by the Atlantic, down to the baking heat of the Alentejo region. However, they make wines from deep down in the Algarve, deep rich reds, all the way up into the mountains of Transmontano. There's an awful lot to get to know in this country, despite its relatively small area. Portugal's distinctive long, thin shape gives it a disproportionate amount of coastline, and means it traverses a good range of latitude, which gives a big difference in the temperature. And while the south coast is sheltered, the west coast gets battered by winds and even the occasional tsunami. Now this, after all, is why it's one of the best places in the world to go surfing, and is home to the largest wave ever ridden. But as we said, there is a vast area of the country which is relatively undiscovered by tourists. From the mountaintop fortified towns and cork forests of Alentejo, the Venice of Portugal's canals and the salt pans in Aveiro, temples of Evora and forests of Sintra, and of course all of these buildings with beautiful tessellated tiles adorning them, Portugal is captivating and colourful. On the wine front, probably the most famous wines that we see in the UK are Port and Madeira, oh and of course that sweet Mateus Rosé in its unmistakable bottle. But for a country with such history and over 500 indigenous grape varieties, there had to be more to the story, so we thought we'd take a little history lesson. Wine's been made in Portugal since at least 2000 BC, and by the 10th century, when Phoenicians came over, vineyards were still mostly centred on the south coast. But in later centuries, the Greeks, Celts and Romans pushed the winemaking much further north in the country, seeking to take advantage of cooler climates. In 1386, Portugal and England signed the Treaty of Windsor. This became the cornerstone of an incredibly close relationship. In 1703, this was taken to the next level by the Methuen Treaty. This was a free trade agreement which made it much cheaper and easier to import Portuguese wines than it was to do the same for French wines. Following this, English wine merchants arrived, first of all in the Vinho Verde region. But in those days, they found the wines were somewhat thin and bitter, so they headed down the River Douro in search of warmer climates away from the coast. Here they found dark, red wines made fast and furiously in the heat. These became known as blackstrap wines in London. However, and we will go into this a bit later, the wines didn't necessarily travel that well. The answer to that was to stabilise them by adding brandy, which killed off any bugs and made sure that the wine didn't start re-fermenting. At the time, this was already quite a common technique. However, the brandy was normally added after the fermentation when the sugar was almost completely gone. But in the Douro Valley, the wine merchants found an abbot who had a completely different technique. He put the brandy in while the wine was still fermenting and still a little bit sweet. When they tried it, they loved it. It was delicious, and it became known as port. The rest is history. This lucrative trade, much dominated by British families, led to great wealth, but also to great scandals. Less reputable producers were dumping sugar or elderberry juice into cheaper wines rather than trying to make things the proper way. All that prompted the Portuguese authorities to establish one of the world's first protected wine regions. The Marquis decided the boundaries and which rules had to be followed in order to be able to call it authentic port back in 1756. The boundary lines were even marked out with stones, and huge amounts of records were taken to ensure that nobody was trying to trick the system. Today, the production, maturation and export of port still dominates Portugal's second city, Porto. When you look from above, south of the river with its Eiffel-inspired bridge, you see vast swathes of the city, warehouse after warehouse, with their distinctive long-tiled roofs, all of which are housing barrels of port waiting for their day to be bottled. Even as an industry in decline, it's still huge business. But what happened to regular, non-fortified wine? With such a range of different climates, going from the cool mountains in the north, not too far from Spain's beautiful Rías Baixas area, going to the hot plains in the south, still wine was not really seen as Portugal's thing. So, why? Like so much of Europe, much of the 19th century was a bit of a write-off for Portugal, with disease decimating the vineyards. After this, many growers decided to stick in high-yielding, easier-to-manage vines that made, well, it was wine. In 1937, the Portuguese government stepped in to try to reduce costs by creating huge cooperatives of growers, mostly in northern Portugal. But these were too inflexible, and the wine got worse and worse. However, yet again it was the British who helped create Portugal's next big hit. And in the mid to late 20th century, sweet, lightly sparkling rosé brands from Portugal, Mateus probably being the most famous, became immensely popular all around the world. And this wine was a true cross-class phenomenon, with fans ranging from such polar opposites as Cliff Richard to Jimi Hendrix, and Her Majesty the Queen to Saddam Hussein, whose palace's cellars were found to be stacked high with Mateus. In the mid-1980s, a flood of money from richer European countries gave a giant kick up the arse to the stagnant industry and paved the way for huge upgrades in winemaking technology. Finally, wine estates could cut their ties with those stubborn cooperatives and take control of making their own wine and on focusing what made them different. Suddenly, rather than being a burden, all those weird Portuguese grape varieties that had survived became a huge asset, and that has driven the resurgence of this country. Portugal was declared to be Wine Country of the Year in 2021 by Bloomberg. It's getting increasing international recognition for its wines, and writers Simon Wolf and Ryan Opaz are writing a really fascinating deep dive book into the history called Foottrodden, which we can't wait to read. Portugal now has 13 distinct wine regions, and tonight in this special Taste the Wine Show collaboration, we will be doing a whirlwind tour of the country, starting near Lisbon. We then move up to the Vinho Verde in the north, then head down to Alentejo to find out all about corks and alternative packaging. We then compare two red wines, one from the Douro Valley and one from Bairrada. Finally, we finish off, appropriately, with a port, a 20-year-old one, again from the Douro Valley. We hope that drinking these wines, some of which were featured in the series, some were from the same producer, and a few others from the same regions or styles, will help you feel like you really understand what Portugal's capable of, and will bring to life what Matthew, Dominic and James got up to on their tour. But talking of which, let's start with wine number 1, where Joe decided to set Matthew and James an interesting challenge.
Your first expedition gets to the heart of Portugal's history as an exploring nation, and none more so than the journey of Vasco da Gama to find a new route to India. I want you to find a wine that best represents that journey and that discovery. Time to go.
No time like the present. Thank you, sir.
I'll see you in a bit.
The Padaria de Povo, a community social club, is the unlikely setting for a traditional Goan menu.
I'm hoping that you are Artur.
Nice to meet you.
Yes. Oh, good. Matthew. So I'm Jane, Matthew, yes.
We need to find a wine that links Portugal to India.
So, of course, I can help you.
Great.
We will try 2 dishes that we can, and we taste some wines.
To start, Arta's ordered a carne vigna dallo.
This is pork marinated with garlic and wine.
Very nice. Got some herbs going on in here, garlic.
Can I take your,
Yes.
your fork?
Is
Thank
that
you.
parsley? Love a bit of parsley.
He's pairing it with his own wine from Quinta de Boa Esperança, a still fresh 2016.
I think it's the characteristic of Lisbon region wines. It's the Atlantic influence on them.
So is this something that you would use actually with this dish? Would you cook with this?
Is there a specific wine that goes into this dish? Or is it just a good Portuguese white?
Good Portuguese white.
Portuguese white?
Yeah. This is a way that sailors used to preserve the meat, and they will take it on the ships.
So, so they would just have the meat in wine?
And garlic.
Really clever.
A staple of 16th century Chile exporters, pork pickled in wine became a dish for which locals in the trading post of Goa developed an appetite.
They decided to take out the wine and use vinegar. Obviously, put some chilies on it.
So it became a curry?
Became a curry.
Does it have a specific name?
Vitello.
Try not to swear.
No way! No way!
Bingo! Thanks to Vasco da Gama, Vindaloo became Vindaloo.
Apparently, with the same settings as previously, we're in. So, let's very quickly talk about the Quinta de Boa Esperança, because I'm sure people are very, very thirsty, and we need to get onto the Vino Verde. So, if you just want to give a quick recap of that, Joe, and then we'll dive onto the Santiago, because we're here to drink.
Well, there'll be 2 bits. So number 1 bit, this is Fernão Pires, an autochthonous grape variety. They love that word over there. It's a native grape variety, and it's an aromatic one. And Portugal has these really interesting grape varieties that we don't see anywhere else, and we get put off by them because we've never heard of them, and yet they're absolutely gorgeous. Lovely, floral, tropical, quite exotic, actually, Fernão Pires. You'll see a few of them. Sometimes they blend them with other grapes, often with their Rinto, which is slightly more boring, or it's got more structure, the kind of Chardonnay in a way, although some people used to say the Riesling of Portugal. Quinta de Boa Esperança, though, remember, it's really close to the coast. And this is the start of Vinos Atlânticos. Really, Atlantic wines start in Colares and end in Cornwall. They go right the way up. And so they're all influenced by those massive crashing waves. So when we all go, all 200 and whatever of us are all going to go, we're all going to go to Ericeira, where they go surfing, and go and eat seafood. And that's what you go and have with seafood is this wine. And honestly, he's the loveliest man is Artur da Gama, who was in the film there, having the Vindaloo. He's utterly charming, brilliant, lovely winemaker, incredibly generous. And I go, well, not last year, but we go every year to a big party that he hosts where we all drink his wine. So go and try. Actually, that entire range from Quinta de Boa Esperança is particularly brilliant. The reds are absolutely phenomenal. There's a new rosé coming actually a bit later on this year, which if you like Provençal roses, you've got to give it a whirl. So they're fabulous wines. And does that give everybody a little bit of an insight into Quinta de Boa Esperança? I tell you what, brilliant dinner party fact. You always want one of these. The oldest hominids in Portugal, they found the remains just around the corner, actually, from where the winery is. It's because it's quite protected. There's a little sort of row of hills that protects it from the inland heat, and so it keeps all these cool breezes that come in. So it is a very magical, very ancient part of Portugal. It's a bit further north of Lisbon. And I love it. Do you enjoy that, you two? Are you enjoying it?
I think it's fantastic.
It's got this nice freshness, this beautiful richness, and it's one of those wines that sometimes you get these indigenous grapes that it's difficult to put your finger on. You go, oh, without tasting this, how do I describe this to someone? And it is one of those wines, you've just got to pick it up and drink it and get it in the glass and go, this is really cool. I think it's absolutely delicious. It's got enough bright freshness, you can drink it by itself. It's got enough richness there that if you want to have it with a bit of seafood, it does really well. I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful drop of juice and, really well made. The wine being great is phenomenal. But as you've said, if it's great people that are around the wine, that makes it even better because you want to sit and have a glass of wine with the people who made it and they've got to be the right people and that makes it a lot of fun.
I have to tell you, after about the 16th hour of lunch when we went there, it was about 18 months ago, it was still really, really good. So I can recommend it. And a 16, 18-hour lunch. Got to tell you, the next day was quite challenging. So it was Mel's the producer of the wine show. And it was a tough morning, actually, the next day, but we made it through. And it was actually a very long day because we filmed all the next day. So yes, it's even after drinking that for 16 to 18 hours, you can still go and perform sort of for a full day the next day. There you go. What better recommendation could you wish for?
Exactly. So top tip, if you're going to drink for 16-hour lunch before the next day, this is the drop of juice to have. Fantastic. That is a top tip.
But we've got another wine here, another delicious white wine, which is an Alvarinho, which is the same as the Spanish grape that you might know. And in fact, this vineyard, while I think in the video we go to Braga, which is just north, just into the Vinho Verde region, I think this vineyard's pretty much on the border with Spain, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, right up at the top end. And these are some of the wines that we've, I think, associated. This was the sort of early stage of Portugal's evolution as it sort of came out of, broadly, I suppose, its period of only really being known for Port and Matheus Rosé. Alvarinho was one of the early styles that started to come. You also got a couple of great varieties like Loureiro as well, that is in that Vinho Verde sort of strip that goes up on the coast. Nothing to do with the wine being green. It's because the countryside is so amazingly lush. It's one of the only great region of the world, possibly, where it's named after the scenery rather than the place. But yeah, Alvarinho when you get into Galicia, and Alvarinho when you're into Portugal. This estate's really lovely because it was quite an old family estate, and it's 3 generations of women, and the grandmother, who's, I think, still on the go, she's in her 80s, she sort of bet the farm, literally bet the farm on going into wine production. And then her daughter and now granddaughter have taken over. And it's utterly sort of gorgeous place. But I think there's this amazing unpolished gem in the world of Portuguese wines. And often Portuguese wineries, either everything went into these cooperatives, particularly under Salazar, where quality wasn't that great, or it was mixed farming. So you had a few vines and you had a few other bits. And, Portugal is still emerging. Now, if you think about it, Chianti Classico was mixed farming, but that was, 100 years ago. In Portugal, it was within living memory that this has sort of emerged. This is kind of the 70s, really, well within my living memory. And so you'll still find these people who are finding their feet, yet have fabulous old vines. They've got amazing heritage, all those kind of bits. It's real discoveries. Alvarinho is also an aromatic. It tends to be a bit more herbaceous in the sort of aromatic quality, and it's a better grape variety. You can use it with wood. You can oak age it a little bit, so you can end up with a bit more structure in the styles of wine. Have a swirl and a sniff. What do you think of that? I've got mine all lined up here, actually.
And I think it's a cool wine. And, I think a lot of time people hear Vinho Verde and they think it's this very light, easy drinking, slightly spritzy kind of wine. But there's a whole region there with lots of different styles. And as you said, you can put Alvarinho in a little bit of wood. You can get that richness, a little bit of lees aging, and you can kind of go through, through the lines. You have some of these, age them 7, 8, 10 years, and they do absolutely phenomenally well. And
he's talking lees aging already.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting a bit geeky far too early in the day.
That's
far too early in the day.
Don't worry, maybe later on we'll get onto Leeds aging and we'll talk about, I don't know, Gary Sprake or something like that. We'll sort of get into sort of ancient football memes. When I've described this, sometimes people go, these coastal wines, well, they must all be stainless steel, brutally fresh, all that kind of stuff. Actually, think about this in the context of Vinos Atlânticos. We're starting Colares, which is, a bit further along, the westernmost vineyard, the westernmost piece of land in continental Europe. And effectively go all the way up the coast of Portugal, and then around the top in Galicia, all the way along the top. So you go into like the Basque Country, swoop round, you get into Bordeaux, which is effectively an Atlantic wine region, particularly for Atlantic whites there. Now think about Bordeaux whites, the best are oak aged. Yes, they're very sea influenced, but they still go into a barrel. Then you get up into regions like the Loire, particularly when you get into Muscadet, and then you end up in Cornwall. Great sparkling wine, it's Bride Valley, people like that, which is effectively a sort of distant cousin of this wine, because it's still got exactly the same principal piece of influence on it, which is battering sou'westers coming through. It's exactly the same climate, it's just a little bit different. So you change the grapes as you go down, but that doesn't mean that you can't go and have a bit of wood aging. Absolutely not. Works well as long as the grape's right.
It's absolutely right. And when you go to this coast, I mean, I've been down a few times to Sagres, right down on the southwesternmost tip, and it's absolutely spectacular. But the waves, the size of these waves which are coming in, it's incredible. And you get that spray, you can taste the salt in the air. And we were talking to a Greek winemaker about salinity in wine, the flavour of salt in wine. And she just looks at me and, we were talking about, is it coming from the roots? Is it coming in? She goes, no. It's an island. There's salty air everywhere. It's literally covering the grapes. We don't wash them, so the salt's going into the press with the wine, and it's a nice. Sometimes the easiest answers are the best, aren't they?
Absolutely. We've got a couple of.
I think we've got some questions. This is great,
but we've got a few questions in the chat. What have we got, Caroline?
Okay, so there's a couple of questions around the aroma on wine number one. Mm-hmm. Some people are saying that they can't quite place the smell and they're getting a bit of a farmyardy aroma from it, maybe a bit musty. And then on wine number two, there's a question about whether it's oaked. And then we've had a fab question from a wine point of view, is what is batonnage?
What is batonnage?
A couple of eager beavers have replied saying it's leaf stirring.
Yep.
But can we expand on that?
Well, it's a bloke called Lee in the winery who's stirring everything up, isn't it?
Lee stirring everything.
There's multiple ones.
So absolutely. So
it's not always necessarily stirring, is it? Because you get these people who roll the barrels.
Roll out the barrel.
And chains. You go, come on, you give us the proper answer. You're actually the techie guys. I'm just some nonsense who talks about it.
I wouldn't go that far, but no, absolutely.
You can talk about batonnage, and then I'll talk about wine aromas.
Yeah, talk about the wine aromas. That sounds good. Yeah. So when you've got a barrel up here and you've fermented it out, so the grapes have gone in, it's all been pressed with the white wine, and what you've got is the yeast, which have done their job, have now settled at the bottom with a few little bits of, parts of the skin and the pulp of the grapes that are all down there, and that stuff just forms a bit of a layer. Now, a lot of winemakers, they just rack it off, which means they stick a pump in and they pump it off or siphon it off into another fresh container and get rid of all of that stuff. But some people like to age it for an extended period of time, which starts to get some actual flavours and colours. Flavours and aromas out of these yeast cells, which have done their job and are now sat dormant at the bottom. But you can take this up a massive level by, like Joe said, rolling the barrel around to actually swish and mix in all of these different parts back up together. And the wine goes, if you look, you can get barrels with a glass end on them, and it looks incredible because you see this beautiful clear wine and this white layer at the bottom, and then suddenly it's turned into something which looks like, it's just completely cloudy. But it's so batonnage is that process of mixing it all up, and you can do it with a big stick or with a chain and all sorts of different tools in the winery. But it's that mixing up. And
it adds a little bit of flavour, a little bit of texture. That sometimes people will confuse. Oh, this wine's a little bit oaky because it has that texture about it. But it enables you to give a certain style of wine a richness without having to go after oak barrels necessarily. You can have, lees aging and oak, absolutely. You can do that all together. Yep. But sometimes you can get a nice, especially if you're using an aromatic grape, that you might not want to overly do it with oak, and you just want a little bit of richness and mouthfeel.
And I think it's cool. I think it's nice
great. Wine number one, aroma-wise, there's a talk of a little bit of mustiness, and I kind of get that, and I think it's got this almost like tertiary characteristic. It's got this little bit of like earthy dryingness to it that gets that. It's it's got that little bit of almost that salinity feeling to it, and that's what gives it that not this overly bright fresh fruit all the way through, and that's what gives that little bit of tertiary oomph at the end to it.
Tertiary.
I'll give a sort of insight into this, and this I think this is one of the joys of drinking Portuguese wine, and actually Greek and a few other countries. Georgia is another example. If you go and drink Chardonnay from certainly most of the New World, the chances are that you'll be drinking quite possibly Mendoza clone number one. You're going to be drinking a genetically identical Chardonnay plant to tens of thousands of other wines that are around there, lots and lots of different Chardonnays. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it's been very carefully selected to give this real precision and bright fruit and clarity and particular characteristics. And there are a couple of other Chardonnay clones that you might go and find. And it's the same is true with Sauvignon Blanc and various other grape varieties. Pinot Noir, you've probably got like 15 of them potentially that you've got in. When we go and try grape varieties like Finale-Peyrache, actually, nobody's done that. It's sort of what people have had around for a while. And then there's somebody up the road and she says, well, I've got some quite nice stuff that, seems to do for me. Now, people are gradually going and doing selections and finding better clones as they're sort of narrowing in, but they haven't gone through that same process of, Giesenheim and Dijon, going and narrowly selecting for very precise fruit. I think that makes them more interesting. I think it, like heritage apple varieties. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes they carry slightly odd characteristics around them. Not odd, I suppose more old-fashioned. There's just more range to them. But certainly when it comes to eating, they become much better food-wise. Much better food-wise. It's like a crunch of pepper on the top. There's a character around them, which I think, I love lots of New World Chardonnays. Sometimes they're quite challenging to go and have a meal with, unless you're having something that's really pretty boring, actually. That's certainly my takeaway, anyway. In my old age, I've sort of got into autochthonous grape varieties in a big way because I've become an autochthonous human being.
It's so true. I think that Portugal has this treasure trove of all these different, not just the different varieties of grapes, but as you say, the different versions of that particular variety, these different clones. And I don't think it's a great thing from a genetic kind of lack of diversity point of view for half of the world to be planted out with exactly the same DNA of grape. It's daft. What's going to happen if the next phylloxera comes along and it just destroys it all? So I think it's brilliant that Portugal's preserved
doom
this
and
stuff.
gloom early in the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, there isn't another sort of, not impending, well, essentially impending doom. There is another side to it. It's already Bordeaux this year. A bit later on, we're going to try some wine. It's got Touriga Nacional. Touriga Nacional from Portugal is now an authorised grape variety for AC Bordeaux.
Absolutely.
One of the characteristics about certainly these two grapes, we've got Finale-Peyrache and Alvarinho. One of the things about them both is that they keep this freshness. When I used to be in the trade, you say, don't call it acidity because it just makes people think of fish and chips and batteries. So it's freshness and don't say acidity. But it keeps this bright, zesty character, even though, well, anybody who's been to Portugal knows it's pretty hot in the summer. So, if we started planting, Melon de Bourgogne down there, it would blow out. It'd just be blabby. You wouldn't get a nice fresh muscadet, you just get something that tasted like slightly boozy water, really. These are grape varieties that they're going to migrate north, along with all sorts of other species, because they'll keep their freshness, sort of gradually further and further north as the world gets warmer. So you may well start finding people getting and planting these grape varieties, further up into some of the great wine regions of the world, because otherwise there won't be any acid in the wine.
Absolutely. But we've talked how beautiful the Alvarinho is. Do you think we should have a little look about where it is?
In 1179, the Vatican recognised Portugal as an independent state. And ever since then, there has been a very close connection between Portugal and the Roman Catholic Church. Your mission today is to find a wine that represents that link between Portugal and the Catholic Church in Rome.
And you don't want us to bring back a communion wine, do you?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The 55-hectare estate where Nuno works is a short drive from Braga. In the heart of Vinho Verde, Quinta da Mares is home to yet another impressive church, the monastery of St. Andrew of Rendufa.
No, you really come up with the goods. I mean, when we asked for a place that links church with wine,
welcome.
I wasn't expecting this.
Historian Dr. Gonzalo Marquez is an expert on the Benedictine order, which built this beauty. He will be showing Matt and James around.
Good God.
Wow, this.
I had no...
I didn't expect that.
Expectation at all.
It is a surprise because of all the gold
in
but
the
size
altars,
of it.
The size of it, the scale, and also the importance of the work in wood and with gold, with religious symbols, angels, saints from the Benedictine order. In the 18th century, Portugal had great artisans, great art craft. This main altar is whole and name to art, to culture, and also to wine, because wine was used in celebrations, wine was used as an economic good, and allowed all these investments. Here in Vinho Verde region, they were essential, because, as you can see, the lands are few, little, concentrated in small houses, small families, small groups. The parcels are really little. And the ones that had the biggest parcels of vines were the religious orders.
Drawing on centuries of winemaking culture, the Benedictine monks changed the face of viticulture in Vinho Verde. They introduced new grape varieties and the ancient Roman technique of hanging vines from trees. This protected the grapes from mold and moisture by allowing the cool maritime breeze to flow, a method still used by some today.
Right, outside then. After you, Doctor.
Just endless surprises. So what kind of wines are we talking here, Doctor? So obviously red for communion, but would there have been a white?
Would there have been a hangout
would
white
we be making more white wines?
Not in the past times. In the past times, more the reds, the 20th century, where there was the revolution of the whites. Now the whites are the most prominent.
Yes. Well, thank you. Good doctor for showing us a connection between religion and wine, and not the most obvious one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Great pleasure.
Nice trip.
Thank you very much.
And from this hallowed turf to that hallowed turf, bon voyage.
Come on.
In the spirit of the Benedictine monks, a new generation, like Nuno and winemaker Joana Santiago, are changing the image of Vinho Verde. They're producing complex whites capable of aging, as well as the more traditional light fizzy wines for early drinking.
Where should we kick off?
So now it's the Alvarinho.
Fabulous, good, I like
Tinted
that.
Santiago, but I chose the 2013.
An Alvarinho, aged for 7 years.
Has a lot of freshness, a very good acidity. Is more complex. Well, the wines are like women's. When the women are young, they have a kind of beauty. And then the women get older and they are more complex, sometimes more interesting.
Actually.
Yes. Yes. More full-bodied.
Do you think that the ghosts of the monks who must have tended these fields and looked after it would be sitting here thinking, don't forget the past, remember the traditions?
It's a legacy that it's have some heavy in your shoulders.
We have to try to respect the past to develop the future.
Thank you. Thank you both very, very much for looking after us today.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Wes.
It's been...
And cheers, and thanks for coming to Vinho Verde region.
Isn't it nice? Just put them up for a second. It's nice to have the different hues.
Different colours.
There you go. None of them green, all of them great. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Now, for wine number 3, you are obviously drinking a bag in a box. And so is this wine. We have taken it out of a bag that was inside a box and put it inside a bag that's in another box. And I thought we might take the opportunity to try to explain why. But I have to say, there's a bit of a stigma to bag-and-box wines, and there's a bit of a stigma to screw caps and things like that. And there are these questions we always get asked every time we do a tasting. There are some really common questions like, what makes a wine vegan, or which is better, a cork or a screw cap? And Joe has got some very interesting thoughts on this, which is really quite insightful. So I think we'll come back and do that. But we'd like to do a little bit of a dive into some of these topics, and we're going to risk, I think, running a video, aren't we?
This is a little red from Alentejo. Get this in the glass. Let's have a look at this video, and then we'll come back and discuss it a little bit further. Absolutely. And how, a wine in an alternative, well, I say alternative package, different from what people see all the day at a great quality can be. So let's roll the video and go from there.
Houston, we have a problem. When Jim Lovell uttered those famous words, he must have been feeling the same sort of fears as the great 15th century Portuguese travellers as they disappeared to new worlds. And I want you to find a wine that relates to the modern day travellers who travel in the space shuttle as far as possible into the known universe.
On the Online Wine Tasting Club, we like to do a bit of a deep dive into some interesting topics in winemaking. Tonight we thought we'd cover two of the most common questions we get asked almost every time. And appropriately, it's all about advances in wine packaging. First of all, since we're in Portugal, we have to talk about corks. And the question we get asked every time is, are screw caps worse than corks? After all expensive wines come with corks and cheap ones have screw caps. The next question is about bag-in-box. First off, what is it that can damage a wine? What is it that our closure or container needs to actually protect it from? Wine is perhaps the most fragile of drinks out there. Its aromas are so complex, so subtle, so easy to lose. The first thing we have to deal with is oxygen, and that reacts with the subtlest of flavours and, well, destroys them. All your fruit is gone. Next, there's light and heat. The ultraviolet in light can give your wine the equivalent of sunburn. It's particularly bad if you've got a clear glass bottle like on rosé wines. Top tip, keep your rosé in the dark unless you're a huge fan of cabbage. And finally, there are the microbes, yeast and fungus and bacteria that live in the air all around us. And if you've got a bit of sweetness in the wine, a single yeast cell that gets in can start fermenting the wine again, particularly as the temperatures rise, and that is what happened to those barrels of wine coming from Portugal before they started adding brandy. Now, if you're a bit of a wine geek, you'll know that that's exactly what winemakers try to do when they're making fizzy wine like champagne. And that's great if you're trying to make fizzy wine. Otherwise, it leaves you with something that's a little bit foul-smelling and cloudy. But the bacteria, it turns out, can do a lot worse. These can actually make it smell and taste of delightful things like vinegar, nail polish remover, sweat, damp cardboard boxes, or horses. So now you know your enemy. The container has to keep all of these out of the wine and protect it from light and heat. However, the wine has a last line of defense. A bit like your fighter in a typical 1990s computer game. The wine has something a bit like a health meter that mops up oxygen and kills bugs, and that is sulfites. These get a bad name, they naturally occur in wine, but winemakers normally add in just a tiny bit more to protect the wine. Each time it gets exposed to the air or a bug gets in, the level of free sulfites decreases, and when all of it is gone, well, the wine dies very quickly. So let's talk about the corks. Their job is to allow just a tiny amount of oxygen in to help the wine develop, but obviously nothing else. The problem is that cork is a natural ingredient. Just like James and Matthew found, it is the bark of a tree, hand harvested. And of course, with a product as natural as that, there's bound to be some variation. Because of this, there end up being different grades of cork available which let in different amounts of oxygen. Some people stick a disc of more expensive cork onto a cheaper body, which can help. But a lower grade cork might only protect your wine for a year or so, and that's absolutely fine if you're going to drink it the week you bought it. So, if you choose an expensive cork, will everything be fine? Well, not quite, because there can still be some huge problems with them. You've heard the term corked. Well, that doesn't mean the cork broke when you tried to get it out, sorry. What it means is that that piece of bark had some nasty bugs inside it deep in the wood, and when they get into the wine, they make a horrible smell called TCA. It doesn't matter what that is, but what does is that it smells of mouldy newspapers or wet dogs. Call me old-fashioned, but I would rather not have that in my glass of Pinot. And there's more. If the cork dries out too much, it shrinks, which lets all of those bad things in. Nobody wants a shriveled up cork, so do try to store the wine on its side if you can. In terms of alternative to corks, Antipodean producers are well ahead of the game on this one. They present even some of their best wines in screw-cap bottles. Caps are available in all sorts of different types, but they can guarantee two things. If you close the bottle up under sterile conditions, there will be no bugs, and you know the exact rate that oxygen can come in, which means that the winemaker knows how fast it will age. When you compare these side by side on a technical level, it's a no-brainer. The screw cap is much less likely to screw up your wine. It's easier to open, it's resealable, and it's much more consistent when it comes to aging. Everything is just so much more trustable. Some of the best wines in the world are now available with screw caps, and in fact, 93% of wines from New Zealand and 75% of Australian ones are screw capped. The problem is that this isn't just a technical matter. Some classic regions like Barolo or Chianti say it has to be a cork or it can't be called a Barolo or a Chianti. And most importantly, wine is so much more emotional than any other drink. Popping a cork is so tactile, so wonderful. That noise signifies the release of all of your day's stress. Pop. Ah. It's time to sit down for a glass of something delicious and relaxing. It's no surprise that people love them. So, thankfully, the cork industry came to the rescue and thought of a cunning plan. People love the natural material, they love the experience. How can we get rid of the risk of ruining it? Well, they've solved it. And the answer is called agglomerate corks. Sexy, I know. What happens with this is that the cork is harvested in the exact traditional way, but then it's chopped up into tiny, tiny fragments, and it's soaked in a treatment that kills any of those nasty microbes. All of those pieces are then reassembled and stuck back together into the perfect shape with no dirty great big gaps to let huge amounts of air in. This means you can make it with different rates of oxygen transfer which are precisely known. And it doesn't make your wine smell like lassie. It's less likely to shrink. What is not to like?
So what were your feelings when you started seeing screw tops and plastic corks? Horrified.
We're horrified.
And does it mean with the lessening of demand for cork in bottles, have you had to diversify?
We are diversifying. That's it. Cork industry is really diversifying the usage of the cork. So the other 10% that is not going for wine stoppers so far goes to purses, umbrellas, shoes, and even for technology. I don't know if you heard that NASA is using it for space shuttles. So it's amazing.
What did you just say?
Space shuttles using cork for insulating.
Pinboards.
Thermal insulation.
This is what you got to do today. Bosh.
Houston, we no longer have a problem. Yes, the same cork that closes a bottle of Alentejo wine also goes into the thermal protection coating of the booster rockets. These are on the shuttle's external tanks, which are jettisoned as the ship leaves the Earth's atmosphere.
Right, that is quite enough about corks. Let's talk about containers and specifically bag-in-box. This may surprise you, but a huge number of the wines you find in a supermarket are bag-in-box, even if they come in a bottle. What? Yes, it turns out I meant that. Well, bottles are hugely wasteful in terms of space and weight. We tried a delicious bottle of Italian wine the other night, but weighed it, and it was nearly 2 kilograms. That's 750 grams of wine, but more than 1.2 kilograms of glass. Crazy. If you're bringing millions of bottles over from South America or Australia, they've got to fit into a container ship. And it turns out that the most efficient way to do that is not to fill almost all of the container with glass, it's to fill it with wine. So what did they do? Well, they put a giant bag inside the container and pumped it up with wine. Yes, a bag. In a box. When it arrives in Europe, generally speaking in the UK or Germany, it's put into brand new glass bottles and then sent to the supermarkets. But if the bag-in-box part is trusted to send it all the way across the oceans, can it be that bad? It's all just about the psychology of what you see on the shelf and want to pick up. So we should challenge that. The big reason for doing this is that weight saving. We calculated that compared to sending out glass bottle samples, we were weighing less than a third and took up less than a third of the size as well. Add in the fact that melting glass to make bottles uses huge amounts of energy, and we calculated that you save more than 90% of the equivalent carbon emissions compared to using glass. And that is worthwhile. So, if it can protect wine even better, then surely it's just as suitable for the really good stuff as it is for our everyday drinkers. Sure enough, we've been putting wines worth £50 or more a bottle into these, and they have been beautifully preserved. But it turns out that it wasn't just us that thought that. The wine show have joined the increasing number of people bringing high-quality wine in this environmentally friendly packaging. So tonight, we present one of those. Wine number 3, the wine show's very own wine from the Alentejo region, and it comes from the producer Herdade de Candeeira, the House of the Lanterns. This is a delicious blend of 2 native grapes and some Syrah to give some extra pepper and spice. We were really impressed. We thought the results were delicious, and it's infinitely better than the cheap stuff we used to see in bag-in-box packaging. So who would have thought it? Turns out the traditional cork growing region is right at the forefront with the wine show of promoting alternatives to corks and bottles. I think that says that perhaps we should all be a little more open-minded to these newer technologies. Even if they lack a little bit of the drama and ritualism, they can protect the wine just as well, if not better. And if what's in your glass is good, does it matter how it gets to you?
Okay, well, welcome back.
I get that Mr. Fattorini was in the YouTube chat.
Yeah, I was in the YouTube chat. I couldn't resist. It was absolutely fabulous. And I was thinking, right, I might have to go and answer Joanna Bell's comments. Hello, Joanna. How nice to see you. I'm liking this. This is going down very well in the chat, isn't it?
It is. It's absolutely delicious. But what I want to pop out there first is there's too many caveats on wine and there's too many blanket statements. And I think there's going to be a lot of people out there going, this is really good for a bag-in-box wine. And I think that's got to go away. I think this is just really good. Whether it came in a bottle, whether it came in a bag, whether it came in a glass, whatever happened. And I think that's really, really important. That if the wine gets to you and it's great, does it matter how it got transported?
I think I finished the video on that line.
I know.
Your line.
My line, and you nicked it, but that's okay. But you know, obviously, Joe, you know, this comes from an area that's famous for cork, which is really interesting that they're doing this. Why, you know, because obviously this is branded with the wine show. Why is this a particular wine that you went after and thought in this format this was the way to bring it into the UK?
You know, there is. It is incumbent on wine people, wine producers, in a sense, because wine is the canary in the mine of climate change. You know, if you think about wine, it is able to express the most minute variations from one year to the next. So it gets completely transformed by a changing underlying climate. It transforms it utterly. So the first thing that we're seeing big shifts in you know, certainly the world of agricultural produce is wine, because what used to, you know, we used to go and get maybe one really epic warm vintage in Bordeaux, you know, in a decade. Now we might get 3, 4, sometimes even more. So the big environmental impact really of wine is moving it around. I remember years ago, maybe 15 sort of years ago, I was at a conference in Argentina, and they asked what the big trends were, and I said, you're going to be asked to send your wine not in bottles, but in, you know, bags and various other sort of techniques, or having it bottled in the UK. And they said, why? And I remember I was sitting on a panel with some very august wine personalities. There was Oz Clarke and various people. And I'd asked one of them an extraordinarily personal question just before we got on, because I then worked out that if you shipped 1,000 empty wine bottles from Argentina to the UK, no wine in them at all, they would emit as much carbon as 1.5 Jancis Robinsons. Jancis Robinson's about 50-something kilos.
That's
and it was about
carbon
80
emissions.
It was carbon emissions. It was about 80 kilos of carbon just to move the wine bottles to the UK, 1,000 wine bottles, without any of the wine in it. So actually you get, you know, ship it in a box, it's about 1/10 of the carbon emissions. More than half of the emissions of a bottle of wine is just moving the damn thing around. And mostly that's in bottles. So we wanted people to have delicious wine, so we bring it in an alternative format. Bear in mind, I mean, bottles, you know, sort of mid 17th century. This is sort of the invention of the wine bottle. You got Sir Kenelm Digby, who goes and creates it, and the birth of the Royal Society. We've had quite a long time for bottles to get reasonably good technology. They weren't that amazing when they started. The bag-in-box was invented in 1966 by Thomas Angove in Australia. It was actually it was a battery acid container originally, and the original version you cut the corner off. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that there was a guy, what's his name, Malpass, I can't remember his first name. He worked for Penfolds, and he invented the little squeezy tap that you put on it. So it's only actually 50 years old, just over 50 years old, as a sort of unit to go and work. So it's, you know, improved dramatically. The screw cap, though, proud Yorkshireman that I am, I always know this one. I got this up one day. This will be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Dan Rylands from Barnsley was the man who invented the screw cap in 1889, I think it was. It was very late 19th century. And that's actually quite an old piece of kit, quite an old piece of technology. I've had 1947 Riesling under screw cap in Australia. Quite often you'll get old screw cap wines, going back a long way. So I remember drinking with some real legends of Australian wine and drinking old screw cap wines. And they are absolutely fabulous. That said, in the right circumstance, I'd love this in a cork. I think corks are absolutely fabulous. I'm not one of those people who doesn't like corks. I think they're actually very good. They add value. But for this, I keep this sort of stuff in the fridge all the time. This is the kind of wine I have. And actually, even the reds. I mean, just the reds, maybe not all the time because it gets too cold, but actually slightly chill this. It's a gorgeous, fresh, slightly chilled wine. So if you're going to have a barbecue, I mean, bear in mind, this is mostly Aragonese, so it's Tempranillo, which is then also called Tinta Roriz. Portuguese have different names for it. So there's lots of Tempranillo. So that cherryish, bright fruit that you're sort of getting underpinning. Now, it does have a heartier fruit that comes from, I keep wanting to call it Trocadero. It's not Trocadero, it's Trincadeiro or something. But I always call it the Trocadero grape. It's got so it's got Trocadero in it. It's like an amusement arcade in the middle of London for tourists. That gives it a bit more oomph and sort of weight, but actually it's still a supple, easy drinking red, which I adore.
And you just get that. There's a tiny bit of Syrah in there as well, which just gives it that little hint of the spice that you get. And we actually on Saturday last week we were looking at some wines from Eastern Europe. You talked about Georgia earlier, but we were having a. It's one of the Bordeaux producers who set up a winery in Bulgaria.
Bulgaria, it was Besa Valley.
And he had put into a traditional Bordeaux blend, he'd stuck a few other Rhone kind of things in, like some Syrah. And we put a live tasting notes thing up, and the top thing that came out was that sort of pepper and
white
spice.
Pepper
and
everywhere.
It's absolutely fascinating just to see how that one little hint of that variety can just shift it to give it such an interesting, different characteristic.
Absolutely. And
there's also some considerable history to that too, because if you ever get the chance to try Chateau Palmer's historic blend or historic cuvee, because there's lots of old Bordeaux back in the day. They used to ship lots of Rhone red and bung it in, and so historic. If you get very, very ancient bottles of Bordeaux, frequently they'll have this slightly peppery note. I mean, they'd have to be almost pre-lobster.
Margaux makes their alter ego, which has a little bit of Syrah in it. That it's a Bordeaux blend with a little bit of a Syrah chucked
just
in there.
Gives it a bit of a whiff.
Yeah, which is really
Syrah actually goes really well in Portugal. It's a lovely grape variety, and two or three producers went round it. It seems to really hit, again, because it keeps its acidity, it enjoys the sun, all those bits. Here, it's complementing something that's much more traditional rather than sort of overwhelming it, but it does give it a lovely sort of. We blended this. We had a great time actually. We were sort of
cool.
back at the offices, and we're trying it all.
Ooh, lots of fun. Well, it seems from the chat there's a couple of thirsty people in there.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do next, we're going to do wines 4 and 5 together. I'm sure, Joe, you can dive back into the chat and have a little chat with everyone while we have this little video. Yeah. And we'll get wine 4 and wine 5 open. We've got the Quinta della Rosa and we've got the Louis Pato. So let's keep tasting, and then we'll come back and talk about your tasting notes.
Sounds good.
See you in a moment.
Your last mission.
Yes, it's going to be tinged with sadness. Yeah, always a little bit of melancholy on the last day.
Well, I've thought long and hard about this. And you've been all around Portugal. But there's one group of people who've been, I suppose, underrepresented in your travels around and about.
The Spanish.
Women. I want you to meet a woman who's spent the last 30 years creating fantastic wines in the Douro Valley.
Back to the Douro?
You are going back to the Douro.
No, right. I'm thrilled.
Quick. Off you go. Come on.
Come on.
Behave.
So our last trip, chum, and I'm going to drive.
Do you think he gets lonely?
I think it gets a bit lonely.
I think it gets lonely tonight.
Joe has sent them to Pinhão, a 2-hour journey from the Bolsa. Just outside Pinhão is Quinta della Rosa. It's owned by Sophia Bergqvist, who broke into the Port Old Boys Club 30 years ago and has been shaking things up ever since.
Oh, well, this is lovely.
Welcome to Quinta della Rosa and my private house.
It is exquisite.
Thank you.
Quinta della Rosa has been in the Bergqvist family since 1906. Tim, Sophia's father, ran the estate until she became the fourth generation to join the business. Leaving London and a high-flying city career behind, Sophia's impact was immediate.
When did you finally arrive and take over the reins?
I eventually arrived here from a business perspective in 1988. From 71 to 1988, we were growing grapes and selling them to Sandeman. So we were fruit farmers. And in 1988, we decided to start making our own port. And I remember I put into little bottles, tiny little bottles, and I stuck a label, and I sent these little bottles in jiffy bags to a whole list of wine merchants. And I never forget, and then I sat there. And of course, I didn't get any orders. I mean, the first order I get to get one from E.H. Booth, the supermarkets.
Oh, okay.
And Edwin Booth sent me a letter, I still have it, and he was my first order, saying he'd like to order 30 cases of the vintage 1988.
Oh, vindication.
That was so exciting when I realised that was in 1991. I had 3 years of trying to pay for all this.
In the years that followed, Sophia won more business, ramping up production as her ports gained a 5-star reputation. Across the board, Sophia's ports have won a whole host of awards. But much like Donna Antonia, she's never been one to rest on her laurels.
I'm fascinated to know, because I know that when you started here, you only did port.
You're quite right. And I soon realised if we were only doing port, I wouldn't be here. I mean, it wouldn't have worked, because people are drinking less port. And the big guys, the big brands, do very well.
So you then went into wine next?
So we were one of the first to make wine out of port grapes. But it was quite extraordinary, because the first year we made a bit of wine, we had no money. So we managed to bottle it up in a cooperative, because we had no bottling line. And then we had nobody to sell it to at that time. I was living half in London and half here in Portugal. And we dropped a few bottles around the place. And I get a call from the wine buyer of Pont de la Tour. And she said, I don't know who you are, QUINTA La Rosa, never heard of you, but you've come top of a blind tasting, and I want you as the house wine for Quaglinos. I realised that we were onto a really good thing.
It's an extraordinary story, yours, isn't it, Sophia? I mean, really, port, wine, the beers, there is a serious amount of energy that goes into this.
Was it difficult as a woman?
I don't think I've ever felt strange about being a woman here, partly because my grandmother lived here. And of course, Donna Antonia Ferreira was the great female icon of the Douro. I mean, she built up a business where she ended up with over 30 quintas. And so I think women in Portugal, in many ways, are very accepted. I mean, the women work very, very hard. But I guess because I'm not Portuguese, I always have felt a bit of an outsider. What drives me is the love for the place. It's the most extraordinary valley.
So if Donna Antonia were around, what do you think she'd make of this?
I would hope that she would embrace the fact that there are other women following in her footsteps, and there haven't been many. And I would hope that she would be very pleased to see so much investment happening in the quintas of the Douro.
Do you know what I think she'd say? Give us a pint of that stout.
With a touch of port.
Chin chin.
Chin chin. Very good.
Portugal's relationship with the oceans and the sea is fundamental to its nature. Reaching out and having relationships with people around the world, not least among them Scandinavians. Your mission today is to explore that relationship. For this quest, I'm sending you to Aveiro. Bon viagem.
Okay.
That means leave.
Yes, it does.
Thank you, Jim.
One of the things we're looking for is how wine here might be connected to, bizarrely, Scandinavia in some way.
In some way, I don't know. Maybe about the bacalhau. Bacalhau is dried cod. It's preserved in vast amounts of salt, something for which Aveiro is famous.
Actually, the city is surrounded by southbounds.
Okay.
Yeah, and this actually was the first important activity here in Aveiro.
The plot thickens. But what has this Portuguese speciality got to do with Scandinavia? Rui, who's well connected in the town, knows just the people likely to have the answer.
Gentlemen.
Hello, Jim.
Hello, very nice to
meet
meet
you.
you. We're hoping that you're going to be able to help us find this wine that connects with Scandinavia in some way. Can you?
Yes, yes. So the best way is come with us for lunch, okay?
For lunch. That
Yeah.
sounds
Not-
horrendous, but yes, let's go.
The Confrérie de Bacalhau is a society dedicated to conserving the long tradition of this salted fish. And lunch is at their cod quarters. Joining them is historian and Confrérie member Alvaro Garrido.
So tell us a little bit about the salt cod. It is, obviously you don't get cod off the coast of Portugal. You had to go up into the North Atlantic to get it.
Yes, the Portuguese, since the 15th century, fish in the North Atlantic, in the Norwegian Sea now. So it's a great tradition.
15th century?
Yes, 15th century.
Incredible. That's
the
such
Portuguese
a long way
and the
to go
Basques.
to get your fish.
Yes.
Immigrant fish.
Immigrant fish, indeed. What is it about this fish over the likes of your branzino or your dorada, which you do get off Portuguese waters? What's so good about cod?
I think the secret was conservation on board. So they conserve the fish on the hold of the ships with salt.
So you can keep going for much, much longer because you've got food to eat.
Yes.
And there we have it. Aveiro's connection to Scandinavia is through this very fish, salt cod.
There's got to be a glass of wine in this somewhere.
Yeah.
Indeed there is, James, and it's being provided by one of Portugal's most famous winemakers, the legend Luís Pato. The final wine is a red, made with the same Baga grape.
Picked 19 years ago.
Whoa.
It's from 2000 vintage.
Oh, hello. I'm not going to cry.
Black
Don't
olives,
cry. I won't
Black
cry.
olives.
Yeah, it's nice. It's very smooth, isn't it? Not very tannic at all. Wow, it's really delicious. Quite fruity as well, actually. Oh.
Of course, this is a wine that needs food to match with. Do you know in Portugal, the rule is fish must be matched with white wines.
Yeah.
Meat with red wines.
Yeah.
But codfish.
Salt codfish.
With red wines.
Yes.
Yeah.
But only one red, that's going to make our decisions pretty difficult. Although I think I know what I'm going to do. And it ain't traditional.
No.
I think the codfather's going to get a shock. Well, this is the pace of life that I most enjoy.
Yeah.
Getting
the soft
older as we
lapping
are.
of the waves against the bow of the boat. I'm not asking you, because obviously it's a secret. I'm not asking you to make your decision about the wines.
Yes, I
that
can't
we have to
reveal
take
that
back
just
to
yet.
the codfather.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, isn't it? That thing of the red, the white, the bubbles.
I don't know yet whether I want to break. I continually break the rules on this show.
Oh, yeah, as in life.
But at least we're not we never take back anything duff. So.
That was a cracking day.
Aye, skipper.
Aye, skipper.
Yeah, really good day, mate.
It
Cheers.
was a really good day. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
So,
not yet.
Not
yet.
Well, we thought
Getting
with
carried
so
away.
many great dad jokes in the chat, we should just leave. The show's cancelled, and we're just going
I
to
think we're
follow
gonna leave
Ruth and
Mike,
Mike's
yeah.
lead in the chat, because that's much more humorous than we could ever attempt
it's
to
a
be.
fair point. It's a fair point.
But these two wines, two really cool wines, two with
Quite
some
different.
really, really great history, but two very, very different wines. You know, we've obviously got the Quinta de la Rosa, which is the port blend done as a classic still wine, and then we've got the Baga, which most famously makes
Mateus. It's the top grape in Mateus, I believe.
So if you like a little Mateus, you might like this.
Yes.
But there we are.
Although I couldn't imagine two more different wines in a way, and certainly not more different winemakers. Luis Pato, I remember meeting Luis Pato like nearly 20 years ago. His daughters now are very much sort of driving force in the winery. He has this amazing T-shirt. I've got one. It's probably on my Instagram feed, and it's his face going like that. And he's a bit of a an enfant terrible. Well, he's not an enfant, but he's pushed the boundaries. I mean, he was one of the great driving forces of saying, Portugal can do something different. We'll break some rules. We won't follow, exactly what things happen. I mean, he wanted to break it out of what had been seen as being either big co-op wines or very boring kind of stuff. I tell you where there's a real divide between where people are at. I think, with Douro Reds, you sort of know where you are because it's an unfortified port style wine. Yeah. There's lots of black fruit. They're beautifully smooth, and they come with the polish, if you like, of winemakers who've been making one of the great fine wines of the world, for a very long time. They are already, in that sense, they're very developed. Luis Pato is much more adventurous. It's much bolder, and he's playing around with the great variety. And I think where you go and maybe get a kind of earthiness to some degree, still in when you're trying the wines from the Douro, he's into sort of slightly, it is more feral. They both have an interesting lump of sort of black fruit in them. I think both got sort of dark forest fruits. There's maybe a little bit more raspberry-ish sort of red fruit that sits in the background. I think there's a kind of briskness about it. But when he was talking on the film there, and I remember this at the time, he said that sort of thing about, Portugal makes wines to have with food. They don't make wines to go and just drink. And there's a general truth that, they're a bit like Italians. And I know there's somebody who's a sociologist said in the UK, people have two parts in their brain. One says food and the other says drink. And they think of them as separate categories. So we make drinks like beer and we make foods like fish and chips. We don't think of the two of them as being combined. It happens by accident, like sherry and fish and chips, which is amazing. In Portugal, that doesn't happen because they've just got one. It just says meals. So if you are a traditional winemaker like Luis Pato, you don't make a wine, you make a bit of a meal. And all the time in your head, you're thinking, well, how does this work with codfish? How does this work with, venison, wild boar, whatnot? And that then, when you try this with the food, you go, oh, right, Before I forget, Brian and Jackie. Happy birthday to Brian and Jackie, who are respectively, it says respectively 40 and 50 years old. I wonder if actually Brian is 50 and Jackie is 40. But that's from Kim, who was very keen that we wished you a happy birthday. It's a brilliant ages to be. I've seen them both. I'll not tell you which one's the best. I'm a big fan. I have to be partial, actually. Luis Pato was one of the first wines I ever wrote about professionally as a wine writer. It was one of the first wine trips I ever went on. And I used to sell Sophia Bergquist wines, Quinta La Rosa, professionally as a wine merchant. Brilliant fact about that, the vineyard that this comes from, I think, is the vineyard with the greatest vertical ascent of any vineyard in Europe. So it's a single vineyard, and from bottom to top, it climbs 500 meters, which means that you harvest it at completely different times because it ripens, there's like almost a month in difference in ripening from bottom to top. Amazing wine.
It looks absolutely crazy. And do you know what? It was one of the things that struck me when you were trying to carry 60 kilograms worth of stone up the side back in, that was Germany. That was Germany, wasn't it? Yeah.
That was in the Mosel Valley, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Daniel Immich. That was an extraordinary day. And I ended up bleeding and moaning like an absolute idiot. I cut my hand slightly. It was jolly. But it was, they're very similar. In fact, it's terrifying. You get driven around. I remember once, it was actually somebody who's just a little bit further along from where the Spire is. And he would do these almost handbrake turns, but they drive around these terrifying vineyards. And if you get it slightly wrong, you're over the top, and then you're sort of tumbling straight down. And yes, to go and get those terraces, you have to use explosives to sort of blow them out. It is, I think, it's the most dramatic vineyard region in the world. I mean, lots of people would contest, mine's more beautiful. And there are very few hideous vineyard regions in the world. I mean, in fairness, Bordeaux's pretty boring. Certainly, sort of the left bank. Champagne's not that amazing, because most of the year it's kind of glum and cold. I mean, the Loire is very pretty. Chablis has got a certain sort of charm, because parts of Australia is absolutely extraordinary. Western Australia is pretty dull. It's just middle of nowhere. massive
Ooh,
plains.
controversial. You've got a massive Western Australian fan.
It slightly depends. I mean, Margaret River's really lovely. When you go into Franklin's like, well, I'm talking to you from Sweden. Franklin is like being in Sweden. There's just a massive forest.
I'd have to agree. Margs is beautiful, but you just sit and you like, you know, for vineyards they kind of sit there, but you kind of top of the vineyards, you look over the ocean. It's like that's something a bit special. And, you know, we'd come over we'd been in Hunter Valley first and come over that way. So Hunter Valley is lovely, but it's just kind of a bit green and it does what it does. And then you got, wow, that's, you know, the difference to be that close to the ocean and really get the feel for it. But that's neither here nor there because we're in
Portugal.
We're on a Portuguese tasting.
The Douro Valley is utterly dreamy. I mean, it is, you know, sort of staggeringly sort of beautiful. I have to tell you one story. We had dinner. It was with the boys. And so we went out for dinner. It was when we sort of first filming, and she has the most extraordinary restaurant when they're down by the river. And we'd all had, you know, a very entertaining evening, and beers and wines and whatnot. And then in the end, I said, look, do you want to see? We're actually treading the grapes in the back in the lagar. So as we were walking up to the cars, we sort of trundled around and we were looking and everybody's singing songs and sort of trundling along. And then the next thing she does, she sort of suddenly turns up with a load of T-shirts and shorts and said, do you want to jump in? And so it was me and I was like, yeah, go on. So it was me and the director, and we all kind of jumped in and we were all treading. And then brilliantly, she was like she was great fun. She got her skirt and she kind of tucked it into her pants. That's the only way I can describe it, really. She sort of tucks this in like a pair of sort of pantaloons, and she clambered in as well. And so she went, it's years since I've trodden these grapes. I haven't done it for absolutely ages. She had a brilliant time. And I've still got the T-shirt, and it's got a whiny handprint on one chest and her footprint in the back where she sort of hoiked her foot up and went and did a footprint on my back. So it says I trod Della Rosa on the front of it.
So that's
I do hope people enjoy
port, boys and girls. That's what's in your port.
That is, yeah. That little bit of extra body, as she said, you know,
richness and texture, character.
I've only trodden grapes once, and it was not quite as glamorous as that. It was in my garage in a dirty grape big plastic pot, and I have to say it was freezing cold. Everyone says that, you know, grapes when they start fermenting generate all of this heat, but it's not quite enough heat. It turns out to get around the autumn in Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire. So but I think it would be better to do it in the Port Valley, so in the Douro Valley. This does.
I can slightly beat that. The first time I ever tried grapes was on a television programme, and it was for the edification of Jim Bowen, who some people may remember was the host of Bullseye, and Eric Bristow. And for some utterly bizarre reason, I think Maggie Philbin or somebody, sort of old-fashioned TV stars, and I had to trade grapes for some utterly peculiar reason. Anyway, Jim Bowen was the most utterly lovely man, and as indeed was Eric Bristow. So yes, it was my first ever experience of actually going and trading grapes. I don't know if I've told that for a very long time. So there you go. But you know, people may find that they're one or the other, and that's absolutely fine. You may be. You know, that's actually much more internationally renowned style. We're more familiar with still, you know, the lighter wines of the Douro Valley because they've been around for a little bit longer. But get yourself into it. And if you try and just imagine that, you know, with a little bit like the wine show boxed wine, you know, it's a foodie wine. This is more tannic. Bigger, it's richer, you know. It's serious.
With that salty cod, that'd be so good.
With but the joy is, if all wines were the same, there'd be one red, one white. It'd be very boring, and there'd be absolutely no point doing something like this.
It's true.
We open them up, and people get to taste them and go, "Guess what? I love that. I need a palette of it for my house." Or, "Hey, that's not my kind of thing," and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, our gig here, you know, my job as a wine guy, sommelier, whatever, is just to get people to their next great glass of wine. It's not to tell them what they must love or shouldn't love or whatever. It's like, hey, if you like this, you might like that. So, you know, hopefully there's some wines that you absolutely love tonight, because I think they're all pretty cool. But all the wines here have a story and a reason for being, and I think that's really important. None of these wines are made just to fit a category. They're made because they've got people and history and stories, and that's what they are, and that's what makes wine really exciting. And you know, I hope.
Yeah, and I love that Luis's right
stories.
at the forefront of that reinvention of Portuguese viticulture. Just like we said right at the beginning, as they broke away from those cooperatives and they started doing really cool stuff and rediscovering themselves. And this, the savvy of you will have noticed that there's a bit of an age gap between the one that's shown in the video, which was a 2000, and this one, which is obviously a lot younger, 2017. So, Joe, can you help us? How does this evolve over time? What would we be tasting if we had that exact wine in the glass?
The closest analogy, actually, it's curious. I remember very early on going here and then Greece, and it's quite nice because you get into these two countries that are known for their autochthonous varieties. Actually, in many ways, they evolve in similar ways. You get quite often a sort of pine resiny character comes through, lots of olives and tobacco that come through. And you can get the old wines like Periquita, a big brand actually in Portugal, which ages beautifully well. You can have really nice, old vintages of Periquita that can come in. And they are, they're properly tertiary, but they're made to become these styles of wine. The fruit evolves much more into sort of, I suppose, old dried strawberry characters, things like that. You quite often get freeze-dried fruity characters that come in. So they tend to have a bit more of a prickle of acidity to them rather than a lush sweetness. And they are lovely wines. I do, worth bunging away. Quite often, I think these are good wines. You go and try them over a period of years and sort of see how they evolve. Every so often, then the tannins disappear, tip over the hill. Baguette actually can be quite tannic, so it can carry. If you get a nice vintage where there's good acidity, lots of tannin, it'll live a long time.
But isn't that the lovely thing about wine tastings, that we get to try this thing where, nobody would go into a wine shop, like nobody that I know at least would go into a wine shop and say, could I have a 20-year-old bagger? That's not a common thing that we get asked for. But actually, now that we've talked about it, now we've tried it in a young age, well, it's still 2017, it's got a bit of age on it. And you can now, your mind is opened to the possibility that there's quite a cool wine that can age with a bit of character, just like, the great wines of the world, and this is one of them.
And this is Vinho because it's also got things like Pan, which are, sort of more, his top tier wines. Those do age beautifully, and they're made to age. And I think actually, as a country, it's one of those countries where people talk about it a lot more. There's much more commitment to going and aging wines. They're less driven by the notion of, well, now we're just more to make it young, and then we could just go and pull it through. Because Portuguese people themselves will go and put these things in cellars, and so actually, there's domestic demand for wines that people will go and leave. So you go and talk to them and say, oh yeah, I've got loads of that. I've got 10-year-old, 15-year-old, whatever. Have we mentioned, because Luis Pato, just, everything has a duck on it, because Pato means duck in Portuguese. So he's Louis Duck.
I just like ducks,
that's
one
of his ducks on all his labels.
Called Patitos then? No, not today. Okay, fine. Whoa. Leave the jokes in the chat. I'm out of here. Anyway, on that note, where are we getting to?
Should we try some port? Because I have to say, we've got a rather special port, and we saw. I recognise this bottle because we see at the end of Wine 6 video. We see the guys sat on the banks of the River Douro, drinking this and having what looks like a great time. They've just been served some pizzas by the Symington family, which is not a bad sort of place to be. For those who don't know, you'll see the name Symington written on the boards, the Hall of Fame in this port house that we're going to go and visit. And Graham's is now owned by the Symingtons. They own a lot of the Madeira producers as well. We spoke to them in one of our island wine tasting actually as well. And I'm looking forward to this greatly.
Yeah, 20-year-old Tawny Port. Get it in the glass. Let's have a video.
Absolutely.
All three of us are Englishmen, where mercifully one of us is actually dressed like an Englishman.
From the 19th century.
Which is fortunate, because I need you to find out a wine that represents a link between Portugal and one of its oldest trading partners. Do you know who that is? Us.
English.
Britain, absolutely. It's a relationship that dates back more than almost 1,000 years. So I want you to find a wine that represents that relationship between the oldest of trading partners and friends. Vai faça, amigos.
There's no need for that.
Come on, go.
Oh, I see. Is that Portuguese?
Yes. For move it.
Quite confident about this one, Joe.
Yeah. We'll see.
This is going to be a pleasure. What? Have you got an idea? I've got this, babe.
You look like you know already.
I do. I mean, there can but be only one place.
A short walk from the Bolsa and occupying a rather unassuming corner of Porto stands one of the city's most historic buildings. Matt is convinced they'll find a suitable wine in here.
See this building? What do you think?
What is it? I've no idea.
It is the original English merchants' meeting house for port.
Get out of here.
I'm not going to get out of here. I'm going to take you in here.
Wait,
It's a very, very nice
It's
wine.
going to be the easiest challenge we've ever done.
It can only be here.
If Matt thinks port fulfills the brief, then he's brought James to the right place.
Well, look at this.
The English Factory House, built in 1790, became the British port shippers' headquarters in 1811. Port has been traded between the Portuguese and the British ever since.
There's some very recognisable names up there, aren't there? Taylor, Coburn, Sandeman. Extraordinary.
There's no denying the English house is, well, very English, and the boys clearly feel at home snooping around.
Oh, England, my England.
Oh, England, my England. Winston?
Ah, Sir Winston.
The billiard table doesn't get more British than rules and regs. Why don't people have just sort of gone, oh, do you know, I just had a couple of bottles of port, just going to do that.
Yeah, in Regency times, you were known either as a 2-bottle-of-port-a-day man or a 3-bottle-a-day man. What do you think you'd have been? Ill. What's this?
A curtain?
It's a ballroom. Come on.
No,
Dance.
no.
Oh,
Right,
come on.
Who's leading? You're going to make me the girl, aren't you?
I am.
Here, oh, God. Get off.
I'm not sure Dancing with the Stars is in your future, boys. Anyway, while not every British house has a ballroom, many do have a dining room.
Good God. What, table for two, sir?
Ah, now this, I know about this. This is actually going to blow your mind. But I'm going to need a hand.
Why?
Both of your hands, in fact. Because you need to open this door, whilst I am going to open this door. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, and open.
Oh.
So, now, the reason that there is an identical room is going to blow your mind. And the blowing of the mind is this. Once we've finished our dinner, we retire into this room, close those doors, and then the port is opened. And it can't be tainted by smells of food.
Any of the smells of the food in there.
So, of course, you need yourself an identical dining room.
Everybody must have an identical dining room. Only the English could come up with something quite so eccentric as this.
Ma'am?
Ma'am? Goody, where have you hidden yourself?
Peel back the carpet, Jim.
What? You down there?
Peel it back, Jim.
What the... There you are.
An escape route from the French or a very angry wife.
Perfect.
Yes, it's amazing. It's effectively, seemingly, a back staircase.
Passage.
The back. I was trying to avoid saying that, but yes, it's a back passage.
Just stumbled right into it.
You did.
In the cellar, the mother lode, 2 bottles of port for Joe. It's mission accomplished.
James.
Well, this has just been easy peasy, Matt.
I know. Jiminy Port Peruse.
We could probably go and have a little lunch or something and have the rest of the day off. Oh, hello, look.
MJ, well, that's clearly. And I'm 1978, and yours was it 1833?
Oh, how dare you.
Dear James and Matthew, not a bad start, but there's still more to discover.
Yes, and to complete this mission, you'll need to journey into the Douro Valley. Oh, I'm delighted.
A couple of hours in the car.
Should we go on to the Douro, then?
Yeah, lovely.
It is indeed just a couple of hours from the English house to the heart of the most beautiful wine region in Portugal. The Douro Valley.
Whoa, look at that. Look at the Douro. I'm looking at the terrain here, and it's hard to believe.
I know.
That these vines could be so green, so lush.
I guess it's just another classic example of clearly cracking conditions for ripening up a grape.
This spectacular landscape is home to the grapes that have made centuries' worth of port wine.
So that's a pipe of port, which is 550 litres. And the big ones are about 20,000 litres.
10 or 20,000 litres?
10 to
20,000 bottles.
20,000.
Oh my God, that would get you through a few Christmases, wouldn't it?
Now, 85,000 litres are produced at Quinta de la Rosa every year.
Right, here are the lagars.
The engine room.
The engine room, exactly. This is where it all happens, all the hard work. And we still tread port the traditional way. And these are in granite lagars. And the grapes come in as shoot down into these lagars, where we take our shoes and socks off and we get in and tread.
Do you disinfect your foot before you get in, or you just like,
Dirtier
no?
the better.
Dirtier the better.
It adds a little bit of body to the wine.
But over the past 2 decades, sales have been in rapid decline.
It's just not the kind of drink that people, and especially the younger generation, they're not drinking port.
Yeah.
In anything like the quantity that they used to.
It's an old-fashioned drink.
You would want to be thinking, I've got to diversify, and I've got to diversify fast.
Yeah, that's very true, Jim, actually.
So you'd be thinking about making other wines. I mean, you really kind of feel when you're talking to them that they're spearheading the way forward.
Well, I wish them well, because Portuguese wine's here to stay.
Indeed.
I could do with a lie down now, Jim.
Go on.
Cheers, mate. Good day, huh?
Yeah, cracking.
Right.
I might just have a little snooze.
I love an outdoor snooze.
Me too. I know.
Welcome back, and that's a cool wine.
That's a great wine, and I think what's interesting is port comes in many styles and many things, and we could sit for hours and just talk about port.
We're not going to.
And no,
we'll do that
at some point.
At some point.
But anyway, so the line is, if you looked at this, we left this port being one of the chilled wines for the evening, and I think a lot of people think port should be relatively room temperature, and that's kind of what we expect from port. But there's this new age world of it's becoming have this port slightly chilled. It's bright, it's fresh, it's got great fruit, and it should be slightly chilled, in my opinion. Bear in mind, drink wine how you love it.
Yeah,
if you want to have it room, that's completely your choice. But I think this is best with a nice little bit of chill on it. It's bright, it's fresh, it's got great fruit, it's got lovely acidity.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Great. And I just want to be out there in the region, sat on a blanket, drinking a bottle of this. That made me very happy.
You say drink wine how you like it. I will wrestle you in jelly to get you to chill this wine. It needs to go and it needs to be kept cooler. I'm gonna get it stuck straight in. I love it.
Wrestled in jelly. Much. Welcome to the next episode of the Online Wine Tasting Club. I don't know how many people would sign up for that though.
We'll see if Melanie will go for that pitch. Okay, we'll try her.
There is an online discussion about the two. I was looking online. One of them is whether it's the extent to which you should chill it. I sort of said cool a vintage. I think it's sort of, when I say chill a tawny, bunging in the fridge. Remember, our fridges are really cold, and these are beautifully aromatic wines, and there's an awful lot of interesting fruit. You don't want to deaden it. You don't want it to just be, sweet and cold. It's not a can of Coke. But then properly chill a white port, which you can have with tonic and things, which is just the dreamy, fabulous drink is white port and tonic. But, certainly a bottle of port, I like to go and, sort of cool it a little bit. I love this story. Did you see the massive barrels? It was a pipe of port, and there's that lovely story about an old port ship, an old English chap, and he went to his doctor, I think in his late 80s, and famously the doctor said, "Do you drink very much?" And he said, "No." He said, "I restrict myself to a pipe of port a year." And the doctor thought that it was some sort of glass, like a schooner. And he said, "When do you have it? At Christmas?" And he said, No, I have like a bottle for 11s, another bottle at lunch, and a third for every supper, because you had to get through 500 and something litres a year. And I had like 2.5 bottles a day.
That's a great little fact. Yeah, I'm just going to have a little pipe of port. That doesn't sound horrific, does it? If you're not in the know. New standard.
How many equivalent Jancis Robinsons of carbon dioxide is that responsible for?
Well, a lot less glass. If it comes over altogether, you're okay.
Exactly.
Because that was the old thing people used to have when they were christened. You get bought a pipe of port, and then you would drink it. There are a couple of people who ask questions about, how long should you sort of leave ports. Now, the thing with tawnies, drink them when they're ready. They're made to be ready. So they do the hard work, so you don't have to. So, it's wood-aged ports. It spends lots of time in a barrel. Yeah. That's why it's got that beauty beautiful tawny colour. Although, just it should just still have, even at this age, you get a hint of a kind of ruby in the middle, just in the sort of core of it, in the heart of it. Then it goes out, has beautiful tawny tones around the edge. So they're ready to drink straight away. They're also one of the great unknown bargains of wine, because the vineyards for tawny are usually the very best vineyards in the years that they don't go and make vintage ports. So, when we think about vintage ports, we don't make them every year. What do you do with those grapes? We make tawnies with them. So they're absolutely fabulous, first-class, grade A vineyards, just not necessarily in the greatest years. You don't really notice it because, of course, it spent lots of time in barrels. With sort of vintage ports, one of the bits, and it was actually Sophia who first put me onto this. She said, drink them when they're really young or when they're old.
Yeah,
they sort of miss
American
them in the middle
style.
ground.
Yeah,
and that's very true. First couple of years, vintage port's absolutely fabulous when it's really, really young.
It's just dead for about a decade, isn't it? At least.
It does. Yeah. Like children, they're gorgeous when they're very little, and they're really quite pleasant when they've sort of done their A levels. But in between, an absolute nightmare. So you just sort of leave them alone from it.
You're talking to two people who both have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and yeah, that's
for everyone out there. I love them equally. Just whatever that is, whatever. But there we go. But that's nothing to do. That's nothing to do with anything.
That's why we drink, though, isn't it? Let's be
exactly.
quite honest.
But no, we're on wine number 6, so we should probably run back into the chat and see what we can talk all night, but we probably need to know what the people want.
What were your favourites of the night? What if you had to pick one of these wines, especially one that wasn't priced on our website, accidentally at £0?
Yeah, whoever before we announced the prices jumped in as we were loading the wines up and managed to buy 100 bottles of Alvarinho
for free.
At £0.
Happy times.
That's not a real order. We love you all dearly, but we were loading the prices up. You were very, very quick. You managed in that half a second where the wine was there and the price wasn't.
Yeah. But if you want to buy the box wine, you can buy it from us. But I've got to be honest, it's £5 off on Amazon, and that's probably the place that you'd want to buy that.
If you're looking, if you're looking at a little pamphlet to do, there's some great people who work with the wine show. There's Winerist, there's Amazon, there's some great wine sellers
the wine
in there.
sellers.
So have a little look through those people.
Absolutely really
phenomenal.
Cool.
And I don't know if you've answered in the chat, Joe, and I don't know if you know yet with the joy of the pandemic and whatever. There's a lot of people asking about Series 4. Is it in the works, or are you waiting to know what happens in the world? Because people are excited.
Well, actually, it's almost more entertaining, the end of Series 3, because we finished filming sort of with minutes to spare.
Minutes,
and we were in Portugal, and we were meant to go on actually to Porto, meant to fly out to Porto. And as we were driving towards it, there were people, the cameraman was saying, look at these pictures. And of course, there were people, in full hazmat suits, and the entire city was being shut down. So we ended up doing a bit of a U-turn, and we went to QUINTA de Esperança, where the first white that we had.
Yeah.
So we ended up filming the very last thing in the courtyard there, because we just needed one little bit of film. I don't even know if it made it in the end. And then we went back down the other way. So we had I think somebody said, we can get you out and fly it out of Lisbon tomorrow. And there was something where I think it was Artur's father had been the chairman of the Airline Pilots Association, and his dad was ringing up to sort of make sure they would fly us out. And he was sort of ringing his mates, going, "Can you please carry on flying for tomorrow?" So actually, because we then flew out and we arrived in London, I remember Big Jay, one of the cameramen, gave me a big hug, and that was it. We all then went away pretty much straight into sort of self-isolation. I think Mel and I had dinner, and that was it. So then actually we had to make a lot of all the sound was done in our own homes. So I recorded the sort of voiceover bit sitting under a duvet that was positioned over a large laundry rack in the sort of back of the house. And I'd pinned up duvets around the walls and all this sort of stuff, and they'd sent out a microphone. The whole thing was kind of set up. It was all matte. And we got everything set up, and I was like, I'm ready to go. And we started recording. The first thing we heard is, my neighbour started mowing his lawn. Stop it. So you know what? I mean, the world of television has been completely thrown into... There are various interesting things on the horizon. So yes, we very much kind of hope so. But at the moment, we're just we'd love doing things like this. It's great fun. I have had some questions on the hip. I'm going to answer one because somebody's asked me a question. Who was it? It was James Keane. What's the best temperature to serve port? So what I would do is I would put port into the fridge, but only for about sort of 15 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes. Don't put it in for very long, just to take the edge off it if you like. Or bring it up from the cellar if you've got some sort of Tudor cellar. I was very lucky. For a long time, my parents, they happened to have a very proper old cellar. So it was perfect when you bought wines like that, and port was really brilliant. I then would go and put Tawny in the fridge, for half an hour, 40 minutes or so, getting it down to, like 12, 15 degrees, something like that. But remember, a lot of people have their fridge at like 4, which is terrible, or 6. It's too cold for white wine, frankly. And then I have an ice bucket for white port, so I do it that way.
Oh, nice. That sounds like a good
Do you know, when we did our Portugal tasting, and so apologies for those of you who were on our Portugal tasting and had to watch that first video basically twice, but the wine of the night was the white port. People absolutely loved it. Nobody had ever tried a white port before, or very few people had, and it was an absolute revelation. And we kind of ummed and ahed about whether to do a white port, whether to do a Madeira, whether to do all these kind of things, because you went over to Madeira, and it looks like such a cool place. I'm utterly jealous.
I was very, very jealous. You had to set up a wine tour there. I feel for you. I feel for you.
Honestly, I'd recommend going to Madeira. It is an absolute treat to go there. Interestingly, they're now making some still light wines out of these, the local grape varieties and so on. We tried some really old wine. Madeira is glorious. I want to get going with Madeira Wine Club. We should do a Madeira Wine Club. It's one of those things, because it's sort of is niche interest, is Madeira. Yeah. And people think it's just for cakes, and it's not. It's absolutely glorious, glorious wine. And they are really historic vineyards. And it's extraordinary, because you start at the bottom, and it's these lovely towns, and it is, it's lots of pensioners, it has to be said. I mean, it is quite the grey pound, so suitable for me. But then when you go up into the mountains, it's like land of the lost. You suddenly disappear into this tropical wonderland that's up at the top. It's absolutely extraordinary. There's amazing views out over, and the crew and I went up for a walk. Amelia sensibly stayed at home and put her feet up. And we all went up and got sunburns and didn't take enough water or food. But we did take 7 cameras, I think, and then we all got told off for nearly getting ourselves dehydrated on top of a mountain. But the views there are absolutely magical. And the stories, was Ronaldo. I don't know more than I ever imagined I would know about Ronaldo.
Lovely statue.
Yeah, the best statue in the world, clearly. Yeah.
And it was where Margaret Thatcher went for her honeymoon, incredibly. It was a brilliant fact. That's where Margaret and Dennis went for their honeymoon back in the day.
Goodness me.
There is a grandeur about it. It's terrifying flying in, though. And it is famously one of the most scary landings in the world. So when you fly, if you're a nervous flyer, just close your eyes when you get coming, because they do this amazing banking turn and they come down. But that's because again, it's another of these very ocean influenced, wine regions, because it's all kind of crashing in. And the story about the pirate, I can't remember his name was, the pirate who reputedly burnt it, and then it was all covered in potash, and that's why it's got these amazing.
I could sail round, but I'll just burn it and be done with it.
You could only find one place, and they thought it was the end of the world, because they heard that because of the sound of it, it groaned, and they thought those were the giants at the end of the world, and that they'd seen, because it's always got this cloud, they thought that was the spume of water falling off the edge of the flat earth. It was extraordinary. I'll tell you the most amazing insight, and you get this a little bit actually with port, much more so with Madeira. We went and we saw some of the barrels, and the barrels get reused, and you saw those huge barrels that they have in port, and wood in those can be very, very ancient. In Madeira, it's even more so, because there's no wood, or the wood that grows on the island is hopeless. You can't make barrels out of it. It's not oak. So they would make barrels out of the ships that the Americans were trading across the Atlantic with. And so they would break the ships up, and then they would turn that wood into barrels. And actually, when you start going back, you start to think, right, this barrel is maybe got wood in it that's more than 100 years old, because it's been reused. It's come from a ship that maybe was sailing for a couple of 100 years or so, that's been chopped down in a tree in North America that was maybe a couple of 100 years old. You suddenly realise that you can be drinking wine today from Madeira, where the wood was a tree that was planted before, Columbus, sort of pre-Columbian North America. It's quite extraordinary, that ability to step back in history.
That's absolutely phenomenal. So where I think we can go here, because there's been a lot of great wines, a lot of fun stuff. For those of you who are joining via Online Wine Tasting Club, get in, watch the wine show. It's on Amazon. There's three series, and it's not just wine. It's history. It's a story. It's amazing.
It's
and lots of
entertainment.
cool stuff. And you can see Joe go to the gym and see if he's as strong as a Hungarian lad. But hey,
an enormous Hungarian man.
An enormous
Hungarian.
Yeah, an enormous
who
Hungarian
gave
lad.
you that outfit? The costume department needs.
However, but because we're Online Wine Tasting Club and a lot of people are signed up because you're massive wine show fans, we're going to do a bit of shameless self-promotion right now just to show a little bit about what we do.
Yeah.
We'll come back, get in the chat, any final questions, and then we'll wrap up. We'll give you the pricing, we'll talk about the wine, but anything else you want to know. So we'll see you in just a moment.
Well, thanks for hearing us on
So
that one.
thanks for dealing with us.
In all seriousness, what could be more fun than watching such cool people like Joe and all the people he meets, but actually tasting a wine? So we hope this is the first of a long relationship of bringing you the stories and the wine, so you can try it as well. That's much more like we loved watching and growing up with Gilly Goulden and Oz Clarke and people like that who are utter geniuses at putting into words what you could be drinking. But what's better than listening to people talking about what you could be drinking
than drinking it? And not listening to us, anyway. But that's the thing.
We do mess around a little bit. You might the true wine fans will have recognised Lee Isaacs, Wineman147 in that video, who turned up to co-host our show there, and brought
you rewrote "Live Forever" by Oasis to be Chilean wine.
And he presented me with this song and picked up his guitar and he just goes sing, and I'm like, ah!
If you notice, I'm not in that video. I left. But anyway, but no, it's been an absolute pleasure this evening. Are there any final bits in the show? Joe, have you got anything to sum up about Portugal, the history wine show, and what's going on, and what people should take away from these wines in this place? Because you speak so eloquently about it. So we'd love you to sum up, and we'll send people out the door.
Mark Farthing's asked me what was my favourite wine of the evening. You know, these things are totally contextual. I am going to say, I'm going to jump down, I do love the wines of Quinta de la Rosa. I think they are glorious. They're brilliant wines, and I love them very much. And that I really, really enjoyed. Partly as well because we're in the tasting. I suspect, actually, if we were having dinner, Mark, that can be arranged, then I might be jumping across into the Vinha from Luz Pato, because I do know once you start eating, that just comes alive. It's absolutely glorious, fabulous wine. But early evening drinks, you know what I'm going to be going and having. When it comes to where those things go, early evening drinks, I'm going to be sitting outside of some Fanal Pires. You know, if I'm going and having an interesting seafoody dinner, I'll go away to with Santiago. I'll tell you what I am doing, and of course, for us, it's quite good because lots of people are eating outside. If you are eating outside and you're having barbecues, having people around, a box of wine is the way forwards. It's just glorious. So you just get a box of wine, have it in the fridge, and you can have lots of them and come in and out. And they do go down brilliantly well. And I know certainly with the white and the red, we wanted them to be wines that, you know, the wines to share. And that's what brings it together. And that was what we did see in Portugal. It is still a culture where people want to share stuff and they want to come together and, you know, they want to just have a nice time with each other and use wine as a way of bringing them together. So we were welcomed everywhere we went, which is absolutely magical. Do go. The wine list actually does an extraordinary tour. They take people up the Douro, which sounds like some sort of carry-on film. And in fact, when we turned up, it probably was something of a carry-on film when we're all there. I don't know who was playing Charles Hawtrey, Charles Hawtrey's character. But on a trip up there, it's striking, it's extraordinary. You go to a winery, you get to see one of the great historic wine regions of the world. The history behind it is staggering. It is quite extraordinary. And you feel, certainly for us in the UK, this extraordinary bond between two cultures, two countries. And, it's a community of people who live there, and they are thoroughly Portuguese and they are thoroughly British at the same time. There's something quite remarkable about that.
Love it. No, thank you. That's top advice.
It has been an absolute pleasure. And before we sign off, are there any last thoughts in the chat, Caroline? Because I don't want to miss anybody.
No, I think
everyone's
you should just leave the chat be, because they're talking about varieties of crisps now.
They're having a little social, so we will leave the chat running so you can all become best friends.
How much do the wines cost?
Oh yeah, how much do the wines cost? That's a good thing, isn't it?
Decent question. So you can, as we say, there is a beautiful white wine also available in the box from the wine show, and that is stunning as well. But the white and the reds available, probably best to buy them off Amazon. Let's be honest. And otherwise, we have
absolutely.
some cool
I've got it written down here. Look at that.
Oh, how about that?
Where do we start? The Fernand Pires, 1995. The Alvarinho, 21.95. The wine box, buy it from someone else. Unless you can't get it from someone else, and then you can get it from us. It's 29.95. But bear in mind that's 3 bottles in the box. 3 bottles in the box. Yep. So it's a really good value.
Or a good night in.
The QUINTA de la Rosa, the port blends, comes in at 18.95. The Luis Pato, which is really cool, really interesting. The Bagger comes in at 26.95, and the Tawny Port, a 20-year-old Tawny Port, 39.95. If you had to buy a bargain. If you had to buy a 20-year-old really Bordeaux, dive in. Great
Take
value.
advantage of the fact that it's kind of gone out of fashion, because it's no worse. It's still just as good. And just, some people don't want it.
But more than anything, wine needs to be fun. You don't need to pick a favourite. Hang out with us. Hang out with the wine show. Buy your wine. Find your local independent wine person and buy great wine, drink great wine, hang out with great people, share great wine with fantastic people. And that's really what it is. We can sit here and preach to the crowd for the longest time and be whatever it needs to be. Open a great bottle. If you love it, share it with friends, tell people about it. If you don't love it, open something else, because I think that's really important about wine. But Alex, I'd say it's fun having you here, but you've been here for however long. But Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on and chatting.
I loved every minute.
It's been a lot of fun.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And to the guys at home, I'm so sorry about this audio troubles. This is why we did a trial again.
We're wine people, not tech people. But if you really liked it, get in the chat and tell Joe he needs to come on Online Wine Tasting Club more regularly. There we go, boom.
I can see it going. I can see it ticking.
Oh, happy times.
Yeah, Joe, I just need someone to replace Alex. That's all I'm looking for. I don't know if you can deal with this kind of shirt, though.
Well, it's sort of contractual obligation. It'll be checks, but as long as you're happy with checks.
Well, I'm sure I can deal with that. But anyway, thank you very much, everyone who's tuned in, everyone who's dived in. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I think at that point we can say goodnight and roll the credits. Have a great night, everyone.